at the beautiful Madam Walker building in downtown Indianapolis, where we caught up with author and radio and TV host Tavis Smiley. Follow me. Hi, Tavis Smiley. It's so good to meet you. Thank you so much. Thank you for talking to us. Now, we were just speaking about you're a truth teller. How did you know that was your vocation? How did you know you were called to be the conscience of Black America, essentially?
Yeah, I think that growing up here in Indiana, you are taught a basic sense of what's right and what's wrong. I think that's true across the country, but certainly growing up in the Midwest was a great experience. I've been in California for, 25 years now. But growing up in this state and going to school at Indiana University, you grow up with those Midwest values of what's right and what's wrong. And I learned growing up here in Indiana that while racism is real in this country, don't get me wrong, it's the most intractable issue in this country even today. But I learned in this state that Black and white folk and others can get along. We can live side by side, even when there are tensions, even when there are troubles. So I committed myself when I was a kid in this state to trying to be a voice for those who didn't have a voice, to try to be consistent to the truth. I believe that it is the telling of truth that allows suffering to speak. Suffering is only heard when people speak power, speak truth to it. So if nobody addresses the suffering, then the suffering gets rendered invisible. The problem is that when you try to tell truths about the suffering, when you try to tell the truth about those who are disenfranchised politically, socially, economically, and culturally, the way our system is set up, it doesn't want to hear those truths. The elite don't want to hear that. The media doesn't want to deal with that. Oftentimes, white folk don't want to deal with white supremacy. And Black people can be tribal. In the era of a Black president, there's certain questions they don't want to ask, certain issues they don't want to deal with. So we all have a sense, this notion from time to time of putting our head in the sand. And I'm no better than anybody else. I'm not always right. I don't have a monopoly on the truth, but it is my vocation to try to challenge folk to re-examine their assumptions, to help folk expand their inventory, to try to get folk to look at the world through a different prism.
You started questioning the leader, then you became the man. How has that affected you? And I understand that being a truth teller is hard, but what is it that we as middle-class African Americans really need to know, and how can we make a difference?
It is the case that when you try to tell the truth, oftentimes that's met with resistance. I learned a long time ago, that when you attempt to do what I do, you are going to be challenged, sometimes with merit, sometimes without merit. So every day you wake up, you better take your big boy pill the minute you get out of bed, and that's what I do. I take my big boy pill every day because you don't know what the day is going to bring. On the other hand, I don't know how else I would live. I couldn't live with my own conscience if I didn't speak power to those truths that I see, and sometimes again that's uncomfortable. Now I have a strong belief that, and Dr. King once said this very famously, that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it always bends toward justice. That's just a beautiful and poetic way of saying that you got to tell the truth in season and out of season. When folk get it, you got to tell it. When they don't get it, you got to tell it. When they agree, you got to tell it. When they disagree, you got to tell it. And over time, they will come to understand that. Barack Obama is the first African-American president, and God knows I want him to be reelected. And more on top of that, I don't want him to be the last African-American president. I want there to be a woman president one day. But there are truths that we have to tell about the condition of suffering of everyday people. And if the price for having a Black president is that Black people all of a sudden get silent, if the price for having a Black president is that we don't push him on the issues that matter to us, if the price for having a Black president is that the gays and lesbians get their issues responded to, the immigrants get their issues responded to, Wall Street gets its issues responded to, and we don't, that price is too high for me. So all I'm saying is that Barack Obama is the president, but he's a politician. Dr. King was a prophet. We can't confuse the two. Politicians have to be pushed, and that's all we're trying to do.
So as a person who is on that new poor, as I would be, what would you say to me?
Poverty is threatening our democracy. Poverty is now a matter of national security. We'll talk about that in our talk today here at this gathering, because there are two fundamental questions that we have to wrestle with, and this proximity to an important election is the most propitious time to have this conversation. But there are really two overarching questions. The first question is, what kind of nation do we want to be? And the second question is, what kind of citizen am I going to be? What kind of impact am I going to have on the nation as a citizen? And every one of us has a role and responsibility in that. Barbara Jordan once said, the late, great congresswoman, that we all want the same thing as Americans, black or white, rich or poor, Republican or Democrat. We all want the same thing, to live in a nation as good as its promise. To create a nation as good as its promise, each and every one of us as citizens has a responsibility, including the black middle class, including the black bourgeoisie, including African-American entrepreneurs. We all have a role to play in that process. And now more than ever, with the gap between the rich and the poor expanding, now more than ever with the gap between the class divide getting broader and broader, there's a responsibility that the black bourgeoisie, that black elites have. What's really happening inside of black America is that those of us who've been blessed to kind of, make it, whatever that means, have forgotten about those who have not. So there's a gap between the rich and the poor, to be sure, but there's also a gap, a class gap inside of black America. And that's a problem we have to acknowledge, and every one of us, again, has a role and a responsibility to try to speak some truth to that situation. But I can tell you this, whatever the answers may be, and I don't have a monopoly on the truth, I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you one thing, the answer is not being quiet. The answer is not being silent. The answer is not putting our heads in the sand. The answer is not acting like these issues don't exist. And the answer is not acting like the black poor don't exist and that they're not expanding. And the bottom line is this, for all of our talk about Dr. King, there ain't a Negro nowhere who don't love Dr. King. Everybody quotes Dr. King, got a poster of Dr. King, got their favorite quote from Dr. King. Everybody loves Dr. King, but nobody wants to wrestle with the truth of what he would be doing were he here right now. And if he were here right now, he'd be chastising us and whipping us in love about the fact that we are forgotten about the poor, and that's why this gap is growing so fast.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Mr. Smiley. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Keep the faith.
I sure will. I'm Faith McKinney with ICIndyMag.com. Follow me.